Okay, we are full house in Zoom.
Ready.
And we have like 30 people on Facebook and YouTube. So, Siggi, are you ready?
I was born ready.
Okay, so let's start.
Okay.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the NiSi seminar for November. And today we are glad to have Siggi with us. So Siggi is going to talk about waterfall. So, oh, by the way, if so Siggi was born and grow up in Iceland. So probably you guys know that Iceland is a heaven of waterfall. So today he will tell you some tips and tricks on how to photograph the waterfall. And yeah, I'm not going to talk more. I will leave the stage to
No,
you,
no, no,
Siggy.
no. Go on, go on. I'll just.
It's your day today. It's your show time. Okay. Oh, one more thing. So for those of you who are in YouTube and Facebook, if you have any question, okay, you can leave your question in the comment and I will monitor the question. And for those of you who are in Zoom, okay, you will have a Q&A after the seminar. Okay, so Siggy, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. How do we do this with the sharing of screen? Just like this, right?
Now that's the same thing. You see the button in the bottom, share screen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then click
I'm,
on
I'm,
it.
I'm still learning.
Click on it, and then
And
pick.
boom.
Yeah.
Ta-da! Alrighty. So we're gonna talk about tips and tricks on photographing waterfalls today. And yeah, like how I was saying, I'm from Iceland, and as you can see, I'm a selfie addict. Either that, or I love to have scale. Somebody in the shots for scale. I started photography in my 30s, and I've tried all kinds. I had a studio, did newborn, weddings, even animals, and then I found my passion shooting the Northern Lights, and I started a Facebook page and gathered some gathering there, and eventually people, started asking if they could tag along, or what settings I was using and all that, and that led to me even writing book on the subject. And yeah, and eventually I started a company around it, and started taking clients out to teach them to photograph the Northern Lights. And I am brand ambassador for NiSi Filters, Fotopro tripods, Skylum Software, that's Luminar, and Vallerret photography gloves. We have all kinds of stuff in Iceland to shoot, and puffins, wildlife. Well, that's probably as close as you get to wildlife in Iceland, although we have some other stuff. But yeah, from shooting the Northern Lights, we went into doing day tours and then workshops, and from there we started doing international workshops. And this is shot in Greenland last summer, just before Kauai came in and took over there. But we're not going to talk about Africa or Greenland today. We're going to focus on waterfalls, because we have an abundance of waterfalls in Iceland. So yeah, there we go, waterfalls and lights. Anyway, I was gonna try to have it systematic and go over it step by step. So I'm gonna start with preparation, And preparation can really make or break your shots when it comes to shooting waterfalls. There are so many things that you have to keep in mind. For example, researching the location, you know, where you're going to go and shoot. And there are so many sites where you can get inspiration for your shots, see what others are doing. And as you can see, this is just a screenshot of Skógafoss waterfall in Iceland. But you can see that almost all the shots are identical. And that's because people don't research. They just show up and yeah, everybody ends up with the same shot. So research when to go. How popular is it? Personally, I like to go early, even for a sunrise shoot, because most people are lazy and like to sleep in and go out when the mass tourism hits it, and then you have a billion people in your shot. So if possible, I recommend going early, but that's not always the case, you know, always a possibility. I mean, you know, the sun may not be in a good spot. And then, you know, the question is, you know, do you go when it's cloudy? Which brings us to bad lighting. If you want to make sure that that you have even lighting or good lighting on the waterfall, then yeah, go when it's cloudy or when the sun is in the correct place for that waterfall. And that varies a lot, since, you know, they all point in different direction. You can also chase rainbows. I mean, if you have sunlight, then it doesn't have to be a bad thing. If there's a lot of spray, then position yourself between the waterfall and the sun and adjust yourself until you have a nice rainbow that is in the right spot for your composition. And like I said earlier, sunset or a sunrise. Some waterfalls, they are just, you know, they are in the shade or they are facing an inconvenient position. So you really have to think about the position of the sun. Which brings us to tools. I mostly use Photographer's Ephemeris, and it took me a couple of years to learn to pronounce Ephemeris, but I'm pretty proud of being able to do that now. But yeah, the Photographer's Ephemeris and Photopills is also a good tool. There you can adjust it to the time when you want to be there and see exactly where the sun is going to be. And you get the sunrise and sunset and all that stuff too. The weather forecast, and I know this is a typical weather forecast for Iceland, you know, rain, clouds, and all that, especially in the autumn. But so check the local weather forecast and make sure that it fits your purpose. I mean, cloudy days, as long as you have texture in the sky, can be pretty good. If you have clear skies or puffy clouds, then just make sure that you have the sun in the right spot. And that brings us to having the right gear. So clothing, unless you want to get drenched and catch pneumonia, you better have waterproof or water resistant clothing, because often those nice shots, they come when you're close to the waterfalls. Rubber boots or waders if you have to or want to walk in the river, and a towel, definitely, to dry off afterwards. Photography gear, camera, that helps for sure. Lens, tripod, NiSi filters. I always bring them so I have better control of what I'm doing when I'm shooting those long exposures. Rain cover or shower cap, not like the photo there. That's shot at Dettifoss in freezing conditions with crazy spray. And that was an interesting shoot. We got some epic shots though. Lens cloths to wipe the lens or the filters, and a remote trigger to get rid of any camera shake as you shoot. Capturing your images. So yeah, explore the area. If you've done your research and seen what others are doing, then you already know the classic spot where everybody shoots. You can go there and grab your shot, but then it's time to, at least in my opinion, to go and put your own twist on the spot. So find a good foreground to anchor the image, and absolutely put your own twist on the location. There are so many things you can do. Go high, low, you know, yeah. And maybe do a selfie if you're anything like me. There are all kinds of stuff you can put in the foreground. It can be plants, flowers, leaves, fallen branches, all kinds. And if you see something that you like as a foreground and it's not in the right spot, then just take it and put it there. You know, create your own composition. That's done all over with all kinds of photography. I mean, you know, Antelope Canyon with those crazy light beams, that's just sand being thrown in the air, you know, to get it more distinct. And, you know, eagle riders in Mongolia, I mean, you know, they don't ride every day. They just do it on cue. I mean, it's done. Nothing wrong with that. Reflection or ripples in lakes or puddles. I mean, the lake or puddle doesn't have to be big to get a reflection. I mean, I've gone as far as to take a water bottle and just pour some water on the ground to get a reflection with great success. Ripples, I mean, you know, if you have a nice pond and you throw a rock out there and shoot it with the rippling effect, just, you know, try to have the rock land on the rule of thirds or something. You know, yeah, experiment, have fun. Rocks, do I need to wet them? As you can see, this rock in that image over there is dry as a bone, and I personally think it would have been nicer for me to splash a little bit of water on it to get that even color, instead of, like you see there, the top is dry, the bottom is wet. So yeah, absolutely, create your own foreground. Helicopter for ants, anyone? It can be great to put something in your photo for scale. And like in this, I don't know if you guys see this, but there's a helicopter that has landed at the bottom of the canyon there. And without that helicopter, you would have no idea how big that waterfall was. So yeah, absolutely. Use something for scale. Unless it's a tiny waterfall, then you definitely don't want it. Then you want to tell people that it was, you know, 200 feet tall and, you know, it was just incredible. So yeah, use a river to lead you into the photo. Tree branches, or do a selfie. I might have to get a therapy to get rid of that selfie addiction. I don't know. But if you like selfies, then, you know, you can try on different colors to see what matches to the landscape. I mean, seascapes can often look nice with yellow, while some other conditions they might look better with red or blue. But just experiment and see what you like the most. Playing with composition, go high or go low. Like in this case, I went really low and close to the rapids, and even though they are tiny, those rapids just above the waterfall, which is the classic shot of Kirkjufell, they made for a nice foreground, I thought. Oh, sorry guys, there we go, come on. So shoot low and aim up. It makes it more dramatic. Like in this case, you know, the rock in the foreground is perfect as a foreground, and in this case you can even plant a person on top of that rock. But for this waterfall, it gets very wet in that narrow canyon, so there's no chance for a selfie there. You're gonna have to team up for that. And if you go high and shoot down, it includes more and provides context. That's from Goðafoss in Iceland on a very cold day where you definitely don't want to get close to the spray. What you can also do, this is to use a wide angle and go close, or use a long lens and zoom to compress the image, like in this case, where on an early morning, to avoid the crowds, I put the camera way back with, I think this was a 400mm lens, and then I ran pretty close to the waterfall, but not close enough to get drenched, but it looks like I'm all the way up to the waterfall. So that's another option. But in this case, it's very convenient because it's like this shot of Skógafoss is like a wall of water coming down. And smartphones, selfies. So when I get to a location, I usually start by exploring the area, and I usually use my smartphone because it's easier than to be putting the camera on a tripod and dragging it all over the place to look for a good composition, when I can just walk around with a smartphone and force the view into the frame, smartphone. And then when I like the composition, I bring in the big camera and I get that shot. So it speeds up the process and saves you a lot of effort. Alrighty, and that brings us to camera setup and even more waterfalls. So I always shoot raw. It goes without saying. It gives you much more options when it comes to post-processing. I use a remote, either dedicated, or I just connect the camera to the phone, which I prefer, because then I have the composition on the screen of the phone and I can see what's going on, especially if I go really low. So I don't have to be crawling in front of the camera, or if I'm doing a selfie, then I can see exactly how the composition is and where to position myself or whatever. It really sounds like I don't have friends, since I'm always doing my own selfies and shooting, but I do have friends, I promise. So yeah, shoot in manual, so you have full control over what you're doing. And I usually use autofocus to focus on the subject, and then I flip it to manual focus so that the camera isn't trying to focus once I press the button to shoot. You can also use back button focusing, and I guess that gets rid of that problem. For most waterfall shoots that I do, I go for long exposures, and that means going for low ISO. Usually go for aperture of 9 to 16, depending on how the waterfall is. Sometimes I focus stack if I want to have everything in focus. 0.5 second exposure, half a second exposure. That all depends on the waterfall and the volume of water. You know, some waterfalls that are smaller and have less volume, they can look really nice going for longer exposures, whereas massive waterfalls with lots of volume, they get washed out if you go for too long of an exposure. So you kind of have to experiment with that waterfall, and that's where the filters come in handy, because it gives you such an awesome tool to control that. And like in this case, here we have one shot without filters and another one with, and you can just imagine, guess which one has filters. And there you can use all kinds, polarizers, ND filters, and shower caps and wipes. That's actually pretty convenient, especially the shower caps. Every time I stay at a hotel, if they have a shower cap in the bathroom, I grab it, because putting a shower cap on the front of the lens, it enables you to set up your shot, get your composition right, and fix the focus, all without having to wipe the front of the lens or the filters. And then when you're ready and you're happy with your shot, and you take off the shower cap and you get your shot. And I thought I'd touch base on the filters and how you can use them to your advantage. There are a few filters, different filters that you can use to get a better shot. We have circular polarizers, or CPLs, graduated neutral density, or yeah, GND, and then we have neutral density filters. So the question is, you know, with all the technology that we have, you know, whether we need them really, because there's so much you can do in post-processing, but you can't do everything in post-process. Like with the CPL, to be able to play with the reflection and squeeze more color out of rainbows, for example. Of course, most post-processing softwares can help you instead of using graduated NDs. And you can do bracketing and stuff like that, but you know, if you have one, then it's kind of convenient just to be able to do it all in one shot, right? Saves you a lot of effort in post-process. And then we have the NDs, and you know, you can't, you know, control the flow of the water in post-process. That goes without saying. So we still do need them. So, and that brings us to, you know, what kind of filters do we need? There's so many different filters out there. And, you know, when I was starting to use filters, I had no idea what to pick. And I had no good way of or no source to find out. So I ended up buying all kinds. And I can tell you there's maybe 6 filters, 4 to 6 filters that are my go-to filters today. And the question is also, you know, the quality. Like, you know, do you want to go for round filters, square filters, resin or glass? I definitely recommend glass. Resin scratches very easily, and the good brands today, they have scratch resistant glass, which can usually take some beating. And then it's a question of the thread size. What size front element of the lens, and is it an ultra wide lens with a curved front element? I mean, there you need specific holders. So the round screw-in filters, they take less space, and yeah, are convenient, although I don't use those. I prefer the square filters because they give me more chance to adjust things, like with the gradients, dark at the top and transparent at the bottom, or the opposite. And there are a few systems to choose from 75 millimeter to 180 millimeter system, at least from the NiSi brand, which is my go-to brand. And I mostly use the 100 millimeter system, which has a standard 82 millimeter thread, and then it has step-up rings to adjust from 49 millimeters to 95 millimeter lenses, which is pretty much everything unless you go for bigger ultra-wide lenses. I have one from Laowa that has a curved front element, and it's still compact enough so that I can use, so the NiSi has a specific holder for that one. And using an ultra-wide like that, you know, enables me to bring the foreground really close, whereas the waterfall is sitting in the background there. Yeah. So yeah, the 100 millimeter system is what I use, and what I really love about the 100 millimeter system is that the CPL or the polarizer is behind the glass, the square glass. There are some systems out there that have the polarizer in front of the square glass, and that gives you a vignette in the corners that just, yeah, I'm not a fan of that. So I want it proper from the beginning. The 150 and 180 millimeter systems for the ultra wide lenses are pretty nice. I have been trying out the Sony 12 to 24 that has a curved element, and even though the glass is bigger, it's 150 millimeter glass, it works really well. And they just came out with that new S6 holder that is pretty nice, and they still managed to have the polarizer behind the square filters, which is awesome. So, essential gear in my bag. That's the CPL, or the polarizer, to adjust the reflection. 3-stop and 5-stop soft grads. And then I have a 6-stop and a 10-stop ND, neutral density filter, to enable me to adjust the exposure. Those are my go-to filters. The circular polarizer, it controls and reduces reflection from non-metallic surface like water, ice, rocks, glass, etc. Uh, it enables you to see through windows or water by excluding reflective light. If you want to, for example, if you have a river that has, colorful rocks or something like that in it, then you can reduce the reflection to have those colors in the foreground. And it restores saturation in sky, fauna, and rainbows, and etc. And usually when I'm shooting rainbows with waterfalls, yeah, I almost always have the polarizer on when I shoot waterfalls, because there's so much you can adjust with it. And it does reduce the shutter speed by 1 to 2 stops, but that's just good, right? I mean, unless you want to try and freeze the action, then that's a good thing. Here you have examples of 2 shots with and without a polarizer. And you can see the difference it makes. So it can make or break the photo, really. So I usually keep it on. And when you use the polarizer, there are wheels on in 2 places on the holder, and to see the effects that it has, you rotate the wheel fast and you see it in the photo, how it changes, and then you slow down and slowly rotate to fine-tune the effect that you want to have. So it's super easy and simple to do. How to deal with contrasts? There are a few ways to do that. You can do it with a black card technique or a magic curtain, where you wave a black card in front of the lens as you do the long exposure, and that way you limit the light at the top of the image and darken it out. You can go for a grad or a graduated neutral density filter, which is probably the easiest thing to do. Or you can do it in post-processing. And if you do it in post-processing, then you're probably doing bracketing, so you don't blow out the highlights and clip the shadows. And you can see the difference here, how big it is. If you use no filter or just a 5-stop soft grad, how even the image becomes with the soft grad. Overexposed sky. Yeah. There are a few types out there that you have to know which one to use depending on the situation when it comes to grads. There's a soft grad, a hard grad, a reverse grad, and a medium grad. Now, the medium grad, it helps when you have a fairly even horizon. But if you were, for example, to have a building sticking up there, then the top of the building would become, dark. But if you have a fairly even horizon, then medium grads are okay. Now, if you have anything sticking up, like a mountain or a hill or something like that, then the soft grad is the way to go. And I usually use soft grads. I prefer that. Hard grads, they are great if you have a flat horizon, like, out towards the ocean or something like that. Because, if you have an even horizon like that, then you don't have to worry about darkening or towers or whatever, or mountains that have black mountaintops or black towers or whatever. And then you have a reverse grad, which is great if you if you're shooting towards the sun and you have the sun sitting low on the horizon, that one has a hard grad at the bottom, but a soft grad facing up, gradually, you know, becoming transparent. So it grabs the light, its darkest, you know, low to the horizon. Here you have it again. I mean, you know, no filter, blows out the highlights. 3-stop soft grad, it's enough to give you a beautiful, even image that everybody talks about when you post it on social media. So there are a few soft grads that you can choose from. And like I touched base on before, I have a 3-stop soft grad and a 5-stop soft grad in my kit. But you can, depending on how your shooting style is or what you're going for, you can get some different varieties. Three-stop and 5-stop. There you go. Advanced shooting techniques. See, selfies. Focus stacking, like I touched base on earlier, can come in handy. If you want everything in focus, then you shoot multiple images and you shift the focus between them. So you have one shot focused on the background, one on the waterfall, and then shots leading you in all the way to the foreground, depending on how close the foreground is. And then you can use post-processing to put it together for you. Bracketing, that's another thing you can do. If you have extreme light, you know, super bright outside, super dark inside, you can shoot shots for the dark areas, and then adjust the exposure and shoot for the bright areas. This is one example of that. And then you can do starbursts as well. Although this is not a waterfall, you can apply it to waterfall. You know, if the sun is peaking just above a waterfall or somewhere in the image, if you go for a small aperture, then you can get a starburst like that. And it really depends on the lens that you're using, how good the starburst is. Some lenses, they're not good for it, but others, they create really nice starbursts. And of course, you have to make sure to, you know, rest in between and think about your next shoot. Absolutely. And that brings us to post-processing. Now, I find there's no one correct way to do post-processing. We all have different styles, and that's what's so awesome about photography. It's an art form. But I'm gonna talk you through how I edit my shots. So the programs that I use for my edits are Luminar 4. I use that for all my basic edits. I use Exposure X as a last touch to my images. Exposure X copies or mimics the old films. And I really like that old style lumpy vignette on my shots, whereas sometimes with digital photography everything is so perfectly round and yeah, perfect. So I prefer that. Autopanogika is a program I use if I do stitches. I shoot multiple images and I want to stitch it into one big image. I sometimes use Lightroom for cataloging, but if you're shooting tens of thousands of shots, it becomes a little cumbersome. and every now and then I grab Photoshop as well. Yeah, and as you can see here, this is well, you don't see it, but this is a stitch, very wide angle stitch from a waterfall in Iceland on a very wet day. But I loved it since, you know, all the rocks were wet and evenly lit, so with the clouds. And what you can do, for example, in this shot is to pull down the highlights to get a little bit more texture in the water, and you can compensate by pulling up the whites so they don't become, you know, gray and dull. And then of course pull up the shadows as well to get, you know, an evenly balanced image. And yeah, that's that. So now it's just to go out and shoot. So thanks for listening, guys. Do we have any questions? Mr. Kawai.
Okay, so thank you for your presentation. Okay, so we have some question here. So Gino asked what's the 1.5. I think she referred to the number on the GND filters 0.9, 1.5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the stops.
Yeah, usually we refer to 5-stop GND as ND 1.5. Yeah.
Yeah,
And 3-stop as a ND 0.9. So it's basically the
it's 0.3.
multiplier of 0.3. Yeah. Okay, another question from chat. On a sunny day, where do you want the sun in the photo? Behind the waterfall or behind the camera?
That depends on the waterfall itself. For example, the waterfall Seljalandsfoss in Iceland, which is it's one of the big ones. That one it's pretty nice to shoot it from behind the waterfall. But of course, you know, not all waterfalls are good for that. And like I said, you know, with that waterfall, it's pretty popular to shoot that waterfall uh, from behind the waterfall. But like I said, you know, I definitely recommend you put your own twist on it too. You know, get the classic shot if the sun is in the right position, and yeah, uh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so another question from Adrian. How often do you use the reverse grad? Is it worth having in your bag?
I do have it in my bag. Uh, I don't use it as frequently as the other filters because for me, I need the correct, you know, conditions to use that. Like, you know, have a flat horizon, you know, be shooting into the sun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it depends on your shooting style. If you are like sunrise and sunset person, you like to shoot put the sun right in the middle for your photos. I think it is good to have the reverse grad because it's block the lights of from the suns. But if you're not that kind of people, I mean, if this is not your shooting style, then you can just skip it. Yeah, it really depends on your personal style.
Yeah,
Okay, so and question from Gary. Any thoughts on the new Luminar AI program?
I have not tried it yet, but it sounds very interesting. If it speeds up my workflow, then that is epic. Uh, it's I want to, you know, keep my style on my photos, so I absolutely wouldn't want it to take completely over. But if the AI can learn from my editing style and help me boost process, then that would be epic, because editing takes a lot of time, and when you're tight on time, that's yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Luminar is a good program. I mean, not everyone like for Photoshop. Photoshop takes a lot of time, as you say. So Luminar is a good alternative for post process for those who doesn't like post Photoshop.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Question from Darren. Siggy, sometimes you put yourself in the frame, the selfie, but the camera works in slow speed. How can you do that?
So there are two ways to do that. You either do a separate shot for yourself at faster shutter speeds, or you find your inner peace and stay absolutely still while you do that long exposure. And that's usually what I do. And even even though it's a long exposure, if you're fairly still, I mean, like in those shots with my selfies, I'm kind of far away, so you really can't see if I shake just a little bit. But
Hmm.
try to stay absolutely still.
So how do you do those shots? Do you set the timer and then run to the spot and then
I
freeze, or
it
or you use other types of tool?
So you can use a wireless remote,
Mm-hmm.
or you can connect your phone to the camera, or if the phone is acting up and you forgot your wireless remote, which is it has happened. I sometimes put it on a delay and make a run for it, but it can be risky if the stones are slippery and
Yeah, if you run
the,
too fast, or you
I
run
saw
over the
them.
rock.
Yeah.
Like the
At least you have
waterfall.
some nice red, color contrast,
Yeah.
all bloodied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Question from Chris. What are some advantage of using the square filters over the circular filters?
So square filters, especially when it comes to gradients that are dark at the top and transparent at the bottom, that's where you have the biggest advantages, because you can pull them up and down and adjust it depending on the lighting conditions. And if you have a reflection, to be able to take another one and put it reverse up there, and that way darken both the top and the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another advantage of using the square filter is that you can stack three, even four filters together. I mean,
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
same scenery, like three
yeah,
filters plus the CPR, so it's much more flexible than
yeah.
the circular filters.
And if you stack the circulars, then you start to get vignetting in the
Yeah,
corner.
yeah, hmm yeah, yeah. I think it's much more flexible in terms of landscape photography. And there's a question from Diane. Explain how to deal with contrast, black card, GNDs, post processing. How to use a GND for for
For
white
white
balance
balance.
or contrast. Yeah. Mm.
Uh, so for white balance, I have a color card, and when I'm on location, I shoot that color card, and that gives me correct colors when I start my post processing. So I have the correct base when I started, since I do test shots of that card. So I have the blacks and I have the correct whites and all that.
Hmm. And can you elaborate a little bit more about how to deal with the contrast, like the black card, post processing, and GND? Is what Diane was asking.
Uh, I am not understanding the question. What?
Mm,
Can you help me out?
yeah, I was thinking maybe she mean, Diane, if you are here, can you unmute your mic? You can elaborate your question a little bit more. I would guess she's asking, like, what is your preference, black card, GNDs, or post
Well,
processings?
I definitely recommend grad there. Absolutely. Um, black card is I would use it out of desperation.
It's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If
Yeah.
if you drove like 5 hours and you're on the spot, you take your gear, you put up the tripod, put everything on, and you realize you forgot your filters at home.
Yeah.
Then yeah, either that or do a bracket. But the problem with bracket is that then you're playing with different shutter speeds and all that, and that may mess it up if you're shooting waterfalls.
Yeah.
Might make it difficult.
Yeah. I think it's this is very, I mean, personal.
Yeah, yeah.
Some people like to use the grad filters. Some people like to use post processings. Um, but from my point of view, I think grad filter give you more organic result, more natural result compare compared to the HDR and exposure blending. But some people can do the exposure blendings perfectly. So it's all about your personal preference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And question from chat, for the refraction photo, do you use a CPL or not?
I keep the CPL on, and you can adjust the reflection. I mean, you can adjust it so that you get full reflection.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah, I think it's good to use the CPL and the refraction, because the CPL is take away, the CPL doesn't take away the refraction, but the CPL takes away those unwanted the polarizing light. So this makes your reflection even better. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Ruben, question from Ruben, can you explain your flow for stacking to get everything in focus?
So you take multiple shots at different distances, and then you in post process you use a program like there is Aurora HDR from Luminar, and you can also use Photoshop, where you just import all those shots as layers and have them align or auto align, and then you can just use auto blend to have them put that all in focus. So it's fairly easy to do. Um, but if you want it in depth, then you can totally join one of our workshops, and we can have some sessions.
Oh, can Aurora HDR do the focus stacking? I thought it's just
No, that's for
for
the
the
bracket.
HDR.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, that's the
Oh,
bracketing.
okay. Mm,
For for uh, for the focus stacking, it's Photoshop.
okay.
Do
Hmm.
you have any other programs that you recommend for stacking?
Yeah, for me, I usually use the Photoshop for stacking. Um,
Yeah,
and there are software specially make for the this focus stacking,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I think Photoshop is good enough. Yeah. Unless you have like 10, 15 photos,
yeah.
then there are some specialized software for the stacking, but I don't think you need it in landscape photography.
Nothing like.
Usually, you just need like 2 or 3 photos. Yeah,
It's only when we get to Astro that
yeah.
we.
Hmm. Okay, should I also, question from Karen, should I always use CPR when using an ND filters if I want to soften the water?
So the CPL gives you 1 to 2 stops extra. I usually keep it on, but you don't need it if you're just looking for soft water. But it doesn't hurt, at least not in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah, but yeah, it doesn't hurt. Just give you extra stop. Um, yeah. Question from Linz and Diane. So they're asking about the black card technique. How do you use the black card technique?
Uh, it's pretty much, if you have a lens like this, and you have a card and you put it over half the lens, then you're blocking light out so that it doesn't hit the sensor, right? And if you wave it like this, during a long exposure, you're going to blur out that line that would be there if you keep the card still. So you technically create a like a really rough grad out of it. And yeah, color checker. I use color checker.
Mm-hmm.
Gino. And
Okay, a question from Donna. I recall when we were in Iceland, your filters easily being clear of water droplets as they were water repellent. Do I recall correctly? Are they glass?
they are glass. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Donna.
Yeah, you're right. The NiSi filters is like water repellents. It's from the droplets on. It has a special coating on it, and it's from a droplet on the filters, so it's very easy to clean.
Yeah.
So this is one of the good things about NiSi filters. Okay, so question from Pam. Thank you for suggesting to use your smartphone to compose your shot, so not spending so much time setting up or looking for the best shot or angle.
No,
Okay.
you're very welcome.
Mhm. Okay, so we have more questions. Question from Karin. Where do you focus in your composition?
Where do I focus?
Mhm.
It all depends on the composition. I mean, I usually, if I have a foreground, I focus on the foreground, and or the subject that's in the foreground. And it also depends on what aperture I'm shooting. It depends on the aperture, how wide the depth of field is that I get. And for example, if the subject in the foreground is really close to me, then I will do focus stacking. Take one focus on the waterfall, for example, and take a shot, one shot on the foreground or the subject in the foreground, take a shot there, and then maybe two, three in between to make sure that everything is in focus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you hyperfocus distance?
I I usually don't go too far with my aperture, because the smaller the aperture, the softer the image usually. So I try to be between 11 and 16. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. So question from John. I use a neutral gray card for setting my white balance. When do you use the black and white card?
So I use a color checker passport, and that one has all the colors on it, and then you can put it in a program afterwards and get a specific camera profile for that scenario, so you get
Mm-hmm.
very accurate colors.
Okay.
It's, yeah.
Okay, we have some questions on the Facebook. Laurie asks, best times of the year to visit Iceland.
It
Pros and cons of different times of the year.
So it depends on what you're after. Uh, if you're if you're not a fan of the cold, then I would definitely recommend visiting in the middle of summer, maybe late June, because then you have the midnight sun. You can go out and shoot at 9 o'clock in the evening and have a non-stop golden hour until 3, 4 in the morning. So plenty of time to shoot instead of being close to the equator where the sun dips like this.
Okay, so there's no time to sleep.
No, sleep is overrated anyway.
Okay.
Well, on the flip side, for us photographers,
Mm-hmm.
the mass tourism is always running around during the day. And imagine if you can sleep during the day and shoot throughout the night.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to chase the northern lights and maybe visit ice caves, then for lights it's maybe September and March. For ice caves, it's November to March.
Mm-hmm. How many waterfalls are there in Iceland in total?
They did a research on that, and I think waterfalls that are 9 feet or taller, it's just under 10,000.
Oh wow! In
So
a small
we,
little island.
yeah,
Okay.
so we have a few to choose from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a few. Yep. Okay, question from Joe. Is it possible to focus on the water itself, or do you focus on the point near the water?
That depends on the camera and the focus system, I guess. It doesn't really matter. You want to go for contrast when you're focusing,
Mm-hmm.
uh, if you focus on the area next to the water that is just about the same distance away as the water
Yeah.
itself, you will,
Mm-hmm.
get it into focus.
Yeah. Yeah, the same question from Nicole is if your main subject is waterfall, you focus on moving water. Yeah, I think
I,
it's very tricky to focus on water. So I would just say maybe better to focus on some things that are more contrast, as you say.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, or something that are not moving, right? Like the rocks. Yeah.
yeah,
hmm
yeah.
hmm Yeah. So, any more question or anything you want to say? You can unmute your mic. Um, Let me ask you one question. So landscape photography, many landscape photographers say that waterfall is the easiest subject to shoot. At the same time, it's the hardest subject to get a nice shot. So, do you have any? If can you give one best tips on how to be creative in shooting the waterfall?
Um, I like to shoot wide. So often I use my 12mm Laowa with the NiSi filter system on,
Mm-hmm.
because with the wide angle, it's it's really easy to get leading lines leading you into the subject. If you have the river leading you in, and it's easy to get a rock as a foreground or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why